A Kelly girl in California. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, it's early there. It's early.
Yeah.
It's only 3 o'clock.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. And welcome to the District 16 Town Hall. Before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge some of the elected officials who are in the room. In addition to our District 16 delegation tonight, we have Maryland Treasurer Nancy Kopp, Council Member at Large Evan Glass, Council Member at Large Hans Reamer, Somerset Mayor Jeffrey Slavin is here and joining us tonight, and former delegate Karen Brito. We also have the president of the Women's Democratic Club, Diana Conway, and the president of the Montgomery County Young Democrats, Michael DeLong. Also with us tonight is the state director for Senator Chris Van Hollen, Joan Kleiman. If I missed any elected officials who are here, please identify yourself in the chat and I will announce you. When also I just see that former delegate Aruna Miller has joined the conversation. So welcome everybody, and welcome to, as I said, the District 16 Town Hall. Let me introduce the District 16 delegation. We have with us Senator Susan Lee, Delegate Ariana Kelly, Delegate Mark Corman, and Delegate Sarah Love. And before I turn the meeting over to Senator Lee to begin tonight's program, I would also like to acknowledge that Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee member Scott Goldberg is also here, and I should have introduced myself. I'm Linda Foley, and I'm chair of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee. So welcome, everyone. And I'm going to turn it over now to Senator Lee. After the delegation gives brief opening remarks, we'll open it up to questions. Okay? So Senator Lee, take it away.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you, Linda, for organizing this and your leadership, head of our Central Committee, and Elliot Greenwald and all your team, and particularly Michael Tardif for getting this all together and making it happen. I'd just like to thank you for everything that you do, especially during these times, and allowing me and my wonderful colleagues, delegates Ariana Kelly, Mark Corman, and Sarah Love to speak about what happened during our 2021 session. I'm really proud and honored to serve with these outstanding legislators who have distinguished themselves on legislation dealing with things like healthcare, childcare, education, transportation, mass transit, the environment, privacy issues, and public safety. They are the go-to people in the legislature on their particular issue. We had to work under some of the most challenging of circumstances and take precautions to avoid being infected or infecting others, and while ensuring that we passed important bills to protect our priorities and get us through this pandemic. In the Senate, we had these plexiglass glass structures on the floor and in our committee rooms, and with the bill hearings being done online and voting in person in the committee rooms and on the Senate floor. Unfortunately, our advocates were not allowed into the building, so we didn't have the same important interaction that we usually have, that we had before the pandemic, and we really missed that. With our state and country dealing with enormous challenges presented by the pandemic and the economic downturn, and the need to address hundreds of years of systemic injustices and inequalities, I'm really proud of the work we did as a team and what we were able to accomplish during this 90-day session. And hitting the ground running, the first bill we passed was the Relief Act of 2021, which provides $1 billion in economic stimulus to vulnerable Marylanders, small businesses, nonprofits, hardest hit by COVID-19 and establish what we call a Recover Now Fund and other programs that include $83 million to raise household utility debt, $279 million to support small businesses. Nearly 40,000 Marylanders stuck in that unemployment insurance limbo should have received an immediate $1,000 direct payment to get them through this crisis, as their cases are currently adjudicated. While many families still are waiting, unfortunately, for their unemployment insurance to process, we passed several laws in the meanwhile to improve our broken unemployment insurance system to ensure that our citizens have access to their money, better customer service, and that the Department of Labor is prepared for the next emergency. I want to commend Delegate Mark Corman, our Montgomery County House Delegation Chair and member of the House Appropriations Committee, for working tirelessly with us in the Senate to move forward a lot of these measures, and we couldn't have done it without him. And he'll provide you with more specifics on those measures that pass. One of our top priorities, of course, was increasing vaccine access, efficiency, and transparency. And I'd like to commend our wonderful delegate, Ariana Kelly, for her exemplary work on this issue and healthcare issues in general. And she'll be providing more details also about what happened in this area. As the December rollout and the distribution of the vaccine by the governor and the Maryland Department of Health was, we believe, frustratingly slow in reaching those who were eligible, we in the Senate immediately took an oversight role by creating what we call the Senate Vaccine Oversight Work Group, which met weekly with the Maryland Department of Health Secretary Dennis Schrader. We believe that this helped push our state towards more accessible, efficient, and transparent and a centralized model, including the launching of mass vaccination sites, statewide phone appointment signups, and a sign-up system for mass vaccination sites, and the disclosure of a county by county and site specific data. The release of the Vaccine Equity Task Force Operations Plan and a community-based priority appointments for mass vaccination sites. We also passed the COVID-19 Testing, Contact Tracing, and Vaccination Act to ensure Maryland's vaccine program meets its goals during this healthcare crisis. And something that I worked on with my committee and with the Senate, with the need to address hundreds of years of systemic injustices and inequalities in our criminal justice system, my Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee colleagues and I held briefings and meetings last summer that extended onto and continued onto the session to pass a package of 5 policing reform bills that we believe will increase public safety, trust, transparency, and accountability. And after overriding the governor's veto of 3 of these bills, all 5 now have become law. And while most police officers are good guardians of our community, we also wanted just to ensure that those who engage in serious misconduct and violence are held accountable. And I want to provide you with a summary of these laws, at the same time answer some of the questions submitted on these issues from our town hall participants that we received earlier. Maryland, as you know, has become the first state in the union to repeal the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and replace it with a structure that increases civilian oversight and police accountability. Every county now must establish a police accountability board, administrative charging committees, and publicly accessible trial boards. For decades, the public could not access records relating to police misconduct, making it almost impossible to weed out those with a history of serious misconduct. So we passed what we call Anton's Law, which would allow police disciplinary records to be publicly accessible through the Maryland Public Information Act, thereby hopefully increasing transparency and accountability in policing. And to avoid such tragedies like the Breonna Taylor case, no-knock warrants now require a 3-tiered approval process and can only be conducted between the hours of 8 a.m. and 7 p.m., except in certain circumstances and emergencies. And we also passed a law to require by 2025 every major police department in Maryland to have body cameras, which have been proven to ensure transparency, accountability, and also to exonerate. And we also established a statewide use of force standard where officers must de-escalate and use force only when necessary and proportional to prevent imminent threat of physical injury and achieve a legitimate law enforcement objective. And this was quite a big change, and we hope that that will address some of the problems that we have with misconduct, and also require agencies to offer employees assistance programs, including mental health services to every law enforcement officer. We also passed the legislation to demilitarize the police and establish an independent investigative unit within the Attorney General's office to investigate police-involved deaths, and legislation to ensure local control of the Baltimore City Police Department, and a legislation to double the amount of civil liability for state and local governments for tortious acts and or constitutional violations arising out of police misconduct, and create a law enforcement scholarship program to recruit the best officers who will be our guardians, working with residents to solve crimes and keep families and communities safe. And to protect immigrants, I know this was a question that was posed by a number of our participants in this town hall. We passed the Dignity Not Detention Act that would prohibit state government from entering into contracts with private detention facilities and in the practice of receiving federal funds to use our state and local detention facilities to house individuals who are awaiting immigration proceedings. And we amended a provision from the Trust Act into this law to prohibit state and local enforcement from inquiring about a person's immigration status, like for instance, during a traffic stop. We didn't think it was enough, but because time ran out, we weren't able to pass the type of trust act that we would like to. And so next session, we will probably bring that again to make sure we do it properly. To make our roads safer, 8 years ago, we passed a law to create a limited driver's license to ensure that people with certain documents that didn't have those documents get a driver's license. So over the last few years, unfortunately, the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as you know, as ICE, has been freely accessing the MVA's electronic database containing everyone's personal information and facial recognition information. So we passed a bill, SB 234, to ensure that ICE cannot use the MVA database to target our immigrant population. And I know that was a question that was asked by some of our participants. Early this session, the General Assembly overrode the governor's veto of my bill, SB 208, passed last year, that will require background checks on the private sales of long guns and shotguns. And the new law, we hope, will help fight gun violence and tragedies by preventing violent criminals and domestic abusers and those that are prohibited from possessing those guns, from going around the law and obtaining them at gun shows or online. And my bill to regulate the use of ghost guns this year, which are guns that can be assembled from parts, but they lack serial numbers and do not require background checks, are untraceable and used increasingly in violent crimes, unfortunately did not receive a vote because time ran out in session. But I wanted to thank all the advocates. It was difficult because you couldn't come to Annapolis, but I'd like to thank Jan McNamara, Moms Demand Action, the Women's Democratic Club, WDC, and all the other advocates that helped us override the veto of the background checks bill, and also on bills dealing with gun safety. And I hope to see it in 2022 on other bills that we need to move forward. As you know, serious cyber attacks, especially ransomware, can devastate the operations of our government, our economy, our hospitals and infrastructures. And the legislature this year finally passed my bill to proactively deter and fight and prosecute the malicious possession or use of ransomware that can paralyze or shut down state and local governments, the economy, financial and commercial institutions, and critical infrastructures. The law also increases penalties for attacks against our government entities, utilities, hospitals, and school systems. Highlighting the urgency of this new law is the recent intrusion and shutdown of Baltimore City's operations, which you probably read about in the news, 911 systems, the Baltimore County Public Schools, the Salisbury Police Department, hospitals, and other entities, which have cost millions of dollars to resume operations and recover and restore vital data. And also with the surge of local entities being attacked, the legislature passed another one of my bills to enable the Maryland Department of Information Technology to provide critical assistance and guidance to localities in developing proactive cybersecurity strategic plans, an ability to identify their vulnerabilities and other measures to prevent, protect, and respond to cyber attacks. As the co-chair of the Maryland Cybersecurity Council and Subcommittee on Law and Policy, I will continue my work to pass the Maryland Online Consumer Privacy Act and bills to update our Maryland Information Protection Act and Personal Information Protection Act, and to pass a law to secure the Internet of Things devices. While other states like Georgia and Florida moved to restrict our voting rights, the Maryland legislature passed measures expanding voting opportunities, making it easier for all eligible voters to vote and have their voices heard. And building on last year's secure and effective mail-in voting, we created a permanent absentee ballot list with mail-in ballot applications going out to all registered voters in the years of 2022 and 2024. This law essentially institutionalizes mail-in voting in Maryland, and we have expanded the number of early voting sites and included guardrails to ensure that those sites and ballot drop boxes are equally distributed and located. And I thank you so much for the advocates helping us on those bills. But I also want to take this time to also commend Delegate Sarah Love for being a champion of the environment. And there was a bill that was before our committee that dealt with citizens' interventions in suits dealing with the Federal Clean Water Act, and that she was able to pass, and we were able to support her on that. And she will provide greater details on that and other bills dealing with the environment. So anyway, thank you for the privilege and honor of being able to serve you in the Maryland State Senate. And I now will pass this on to my wonderful colleague, Delegate Ariana Kelly.
There we go. Hi guys, sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Susan, for the wonderful introduction and for really doing a great overview of the entire session. I am coming to you guys from Marin County, California, which is probably the only, it's beautiful here, but the only place in the country that makes Bethesda seem really affordable. So I'd love to live here, could never afford it. This session, it was really challenging in many ways. I think all of us have jointly some accomplishments that we're really proud of, but there's a lot of folks on the call. I just want to convey that it was challenging. We started the session before the vaccine was readily available. It was very intense. We are, in Montgomery County, we have a belief in science and a high vaccination rate. Not all of our colleagues share those same values. There are a number of colleagues that we were with who did not use COVID precautions, did not believe in COVID precautions. And it was a very high stress environment. I saw Senator Lee, I think 0 times during the session. I saw Sarah Love 1 time during the session. I think I saw Mark only on Zoom because we were in separate places, which made it very difficult to do our jobs. But I am proud of the work we did under those circumstances. So we had 2 different chambers meeting in the House, the annex chamber, which is where I was, and then the big kids chamber, like at Thanksgiving dinner when you have the big kids table, which is where Mark and Sarah were. And it was just, by lottery, which room you got put in. But as a result, I was in this really awkward position all session where if I had a bill to defend on the floor and for reference, for those of you who don't come to this event every year, I chair the Health Occupations and the Long-Term Care Subcommittee, which is the busiest subcommittee on the Healthcare Committee. So I have more bills than anybody else I know to defend on the floor. But when I had a bill to defend on the floor, I either had to have a friend defend it for me, or if it was going to be really controversial, run over there at the last minute, because we don't get told in advance when the bill's getting called up, like run around the block, run up the stairs, huffing and puffing. I'm a little bit out of shape, breathing heavily, running over there to try and answer questions. Extremely stressful. One of the things I was most proud of this session was watching Delegate Love actually rise to this occasion, because I know a lot of her colleagues on the Environment and Transportation Committee were depending on her to defend their bills from their subcommittees, and she did such a great job. And I was watching her on the big TV in the annex, just glowing with pride. I was so excited to see her doing that. But for me, it was really challenging because there was a lot of running back and forth and a lack of communication in the ways that we're used to communicating. That being said, Senator Lee touched on a lot of the bigger bills that we passed. I think we also did a relief act she touched on briefly, but expanding the earned income tax credit is really huge for working families. That was something I'm really proud of. We had some tax relief for small businesses and modifications to the unemployment system, which were much, much needed. So those were our immediate responses to COVID. We also did do quite a bit of work on vaccines and vaccine access, which was happening exactly at the time during the session. I know that we received, one of the questions we received was about mandating vaccines. As I mentioned, I'm here in California, and that's something they're discussing right now as they're preparing their back to school plans. We did not do any legislation in that space, but we did do vaccine access legislation related to childhood vaccinations, which is something we're going to be working on over the next couple months now that the COVID vaccine is going to be available for children. Thank goodness, my son's 14. I can't wait. He'll be the last person in my household to get vaccinated, and then the younger children soon. So we're going to make sure to have continued access to childhood vaccinations at pharmacies and through the health clinics. We did a piece of legislation for that that's going to freeze that access for at least 2 years while we study it. In the past, children had only been able to receive vaccines through a physician or a public health clinic. We found some challenges because since we didn't go back to school, we were dependent on MCPS partnering with the health department to get kids regular vaccines, not just their COVID vaccines, up to date at back to school. We didn't do that this year. So even in Montgomery County, we saw really plummeting rates of childhood vaccines for things like measles, which is not a situation we want to be in. So we did work in that space, which I was really proud of. We also did significant amount of work related to health equity and health disparities. We established a permanent commission and committed resources to funding health equity work, which is something that we've been a leader on in Maryland, but again, having dedicated resources always makes a difference. So I'm very proud of that. We had a big piece of telehealth legislation. One of the things that we learned during COVID was how critically important access to telehealth can be and what a wonderful resource it can be. It's really complicated in terms of reimbursement and payment and also licensing. Are you seeing someone who's licensed in another place? Are you in another place? It gets really knotty. So what we ended up doing was passing a piece of legislation that again will freeze that access in place for 2 years. And we're going to look at it and study it and come up with some final determinations about how reimbursement for that works. But again, just like with the childhood vaccine access, with the telehealth access, we wanted to make sure not to make any permanent decisions while we were in this middle of the getting out of the COVID pandemic situation. But that was really important legislation because it's going to make sure people have continued access to telehealth services and expand that access to audio only. So if someone doesn't have access to internet, they would still have access to telehealth. Incredibly important. The other set of legislation that we did that was really influenced by the COVID experience was bills around long-term care. We had sort of an omnibus piece of nursing home visitation legislation in response to some of the challenges we saw around nursing home visitation. And then we also had a piece of legislation that is going to require updating of our assisted living regulations, as well as establishing memory care unit regulations for the first time, which is incredibly important. So I'm proud that we did that. We had a piece of legislation that is going to establish a pilot program for subsidies for young adults in the insurance market. If you know anything about insurance, you know we when I say we, I mean those of us who are in the older, more expensive health insurance pool, like myself, really depend on having what we would call the young invincibles, people in their 20s and their early 30s who are healthier. In those insurance marketplaces, it spreads the risk. It's really important, but it's incredibly expensive. And when you're starting out, you don't necessarily have a lot of money. So one of the things that we want to try out is creating subsidies for healthy young adults to get them into that insurance marketplace. So we have a pilot program for that, which is really exciting, and I hope it works. We will learn from that and see if it does. And then we did a couple of really cool pieces of legislation around mental health. We had established a couple years ago a 211 call program for elder care for people who needed phone call check-ins for when they were as elderly folks who just, you want to make sure that someone's calling to check on them. And we're going to expand that program for folks who are in mental health crisis. So it's a voluntary program. They can sign up for a call in, for a check-in call. So that's a new and innovative program that we hope will really help people who are going through mental health crises. It was very touching on the floor. We named that after Tommy Bloom Raskin. So that was very touching. The other piece of mental health legislation that we did, which was very controversial, got a lot of attention on the floor, but I am a huge champion of. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. In the state of Maryland right now, for a number of different types of healthcare that you might feel shame about, not appropriately feel shame, but nonetheless, there might be some social stigma about, such as HIV or sexually transmitted infection or sexual assault. For any healthcare in that space, a minor can consent to treatment without parental notification. What we did was we allowed for mental health treatment that same recognition that obviously healthcare providers definitely want parents involved in the healthcare treatment of minors. And that's the standard of care that healthcare practitioners must follow in order to maintain their licenses. That being said, there are certain circumstances, and you can all imagine them, where if the parent is part of the problem, if the parent is the person who is sexually abusing someone, or if the parent is the person, there are certain situations that are narrow and limited where involving the parent will make things worse. And in those instances, we're going to allow minors to seek mental health treatment without parental consent. And again, to be clear, any licensed healthcare provider who would be providing mental health services has standards of care they have to follow. So it's not that any minor can seek this treatment and a licensed provider is going to go ahead and provide it. They're going to meet with the licensed provider. The licensed provider goal number one is going to be, how do I get this minor to a place where they can loop their parent into this crisis because this is a person that needs help. If that's not possible, then they take a different path, but they're still getting the help and the services they need. But this is really critically important. Again, for minors who are struggling with mental health issues, we are trying to address that increase in teen suicide, and I think that this is really going to help. So I'm glad that we've done this, and just want to make sure everybody listening knows this is not a radical departure. It did get quite a bit of press, but there's a ton of precedent. We've been for decades in Maryland allowing minors to consent to healthcare services related to sexually transmitted infections and related to HIV/AIDS treatment, related to pregnancy, related to if they're incarcerated, if they're arrested, so there are tons of other situations. Healthcare providers know how to follow these rules. So I think it's going to be good, and I think it's going to save lives. Speaking of things that are controversial, we did receive a number of questions from Maryland Democrats for Life about what the status is of a particular, I guess it's an investigation, pending investigation related to a couple of transfers that took place at an abortion clinic here in District 16. So I wanted to make sure to walk through everybody in terms of the existing process that's in place and the reason why we as legislators don't really intervene in these pending investigations. Surgical abortion clinics are licensed by OHCQ in the state of Maryland, the Office of Healthcare Quality. Same folks that license the ambulatory surgical centers and the nursing homes. These are the professionals whose job it is, and we require through state regulation that they investigate any claims of any concerns. So if there's a transfer, like for example, when I gave birth to my daughter, I was in a birthing center, again, regulated by OHCQ. Certain things are triggered that require a transfer. She was born healthy, but I had to be transferred to Shady Grove to finally give birth to her. So so I think what happened in our local abortion clinic was that there were some things that necessitated a transfer. Generally, there are protocols that need to be followed. It, again, is for healthcare quality. That's the reason we have these rules. And so that's why the Office of Healthcare Quality is required by regulation to be the one to do that investigation. So that is currently happening right now. And I just wanted to give an update because I know that we had heard a number of questions from Maryland Democrats for Life on that. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that that's in the process right now. It's happening. It's outside of the scope of the work that the state legislators do, and it's in the space of the OHCQ, the Office of Healthcare Quality, that does this for all sorts of different healthcare providers, including nursing homes and ambulatory surgical centers. But I did want to say that there are some really great victories that we had in places where we can all agree, right? When we talk about the abortion debate, we can have, people are on different sides, they know where they're at. But the place where I like for us to all come together is, what can we do that we can all agree on? One of those things is this huge victory we had this year. For the last decade, at least in Maryland, we have been struggling to figure out where to find the money to expand postpartum Medicaid services for women who do choose to have children. Right now in Maryland, the way it works is if you are Medicaid eligible when you become pregnant, which is a much higher threshold for Medicaid eligibility, you get health care, and then you get kicked off once that baby is 3 months old. And this is a huge problem because a lot of women have medical problems in that first year after childbirth. So one of the things that people who are women's health advocates who care about healthy babies and healthy moms have wanted to do is make sure that we're not kicking women off of their health care when their baby is 3 months old. And we had a huge victory this year in that Senator Mary Washington, along with all of us, were able to pass legislation that expands Medicaid coverage for 1 full year postpartum. That is going to help have healthy mothers, have healthy babies. It's going to be tremendous. I'm so excited we were able to do that. So we should all be really proud because we're doing the right thing for moms and babies there. I also passed a piece of legislation this year that I'm really thrilled about that is going to increase access to autism treatment for children on Medicaid. We passed a bill more than 10 years ago to do that in the private insurance market, and it's taken a decade to catch up Medicaid. So again, one of the themes of this year was making sure that regardless of whether you're private pay for insurance or you're on Medicaid, you're getting the same quality care. So I'm really proud of that work. And I had another piece of legislation that you'll hear about as well next year, but we did the first piece of it this year, which has to do with what we call health information exchanges. We have 11 of them in the state of Maryland, and they share our health data in between them. It's really highly technical, but if you can imagine that if you think about how we proceeded with the vaccine rollout, one of the complaints that we heard all the time was, oh my God, there are 45 different websites. I don't know how to do it. Why can't we have a one-stop shop? So what we did this year was created a one-stop shop for opting out of sharing your personal health information. So over the next year, we're going to be developing in the state of Maryland that one-stop shop so that as these health information exchanges are sharing information and you may want to keep that information private, you'll have one website to go to instead of 11 different websites to go to keep that information private. So I'm excited about that. And that's going to be an ongoing project for the next couple of years. I think that's about it for major healthcare related stuff. I'm sure I want to make sure I touched on all the questions. There was one about mandating vaccines, and I'm not sure if I answered it. Basically, oh yes, now I remember what I was going to say. We did not address that specifically this session, although it did come up as a floor amendment. There was a floor amendment on one of my bills related to childhood vaccinations that was basically suggesting that we as a state should give up our right to mandate vaccines. And we defeated that amendment very strongly. And the reason for that, I just want to make sure everybody on this call knows, for more than 100 years, we have had the right to mandate vaccines. It's something that we've used. It's something that we use in Montgomery County and in the state of Maryland for our school system. It's very important and it saves lives. So just want to make sure that we keep that perspective in mind as we move forward in this conversation. Local news here in San Francisco was discussing this. It's going to be an issue we're going to be hearing about over the next couple of months. It's dicey. People feel very strongly about it. But just keep in mind that, again, just like with the mental health access, this is something we have been doing in the state of Maryland for a long time, and it's really important for public health. With that, we have 2 more folks to speak. I hope I didn't go over my time. I think Mark is going to go next. So let's hear from Mark Corman all about all the stuff he's been working on this session, which I'm sure has been transportation, the budget, saving Montgomery County from ourselves and each other, all sorts of wonderful things. Thank you, Mark, for everything you do.
So Delegate Kelly gave you the Cliff Notes version of what I'm going to talk about, so I guess I should just hang up and be done. But no, thank you, Delegate Kelly. I think everybody here hopefully receives her emails, particularly those about the vaccine, which for 7 or 8 weeks there were sort of the Bible for understanding what was going on in the state and the county with vaccines, incredibly informative and useful. And what people didn't necessarily see was all the work that went in behind that, because sometimes I was on the emails and the phone calls and in the meetings of the work that Ariana was doing with her team to make sure that not only were people getting vaccines, but people were sort of understanding the process and how to get vaccines and just getting a little bit more informed. I think a big part of the problem is a lack of information. People just sort of want to know what's going on, even if they can't be first in line for the vaccine. And Delegate Kelly did a great job of shedding light on that for folks. So thank you, Delegate Kelly. Plus it made assembling my newsletter easier because I could just copy and paste every week. So that was very handy. I also wanted to shout out to Councilman Friedson, who I'm not sure if he was introduced before, but certainly was before he was on. He's now on with us as well. Thank you, Councilman Friedson, for your partnership, including this year on a big success we had, obtaining some funding for the Pepco Powerline Trail that goes through Montgomery County as part of a special one-year parks program we were able to do as part of the budget. Senator Lee and Delegate Kelly both talked about some of the unique aspects of the session, particularly related to the COVID-19 protocols, which were definitely different and challenging. But this session has another attribute in my mind, which is this, to me, had the highest volume of high octane legislation of any session that I've been a part of, and this was my, I think, 7th. We dealt with and passed in some form, actually, more issues of high impact that people care about in a single session than any other time that I've been in the Assembly over these 7 years. Things related to COVID, things related to rights for renters, things related to immigration, things related to obviously police reform that Senator Lee talked so much about, just a host of other issues. Now, I know many of you on here care deeply about causes that not everything did get done. And I respect that and appreciate that. And of course, there's always more work to do. There's no sort of spiking the football in the end zone in public policy. But I did just want to acknowledge that this was an unusually productive year overall, at least in my experience. I mean, we dealt with a couple of bills this year that flew by so quickly and easily that people don't even realize they happened, even though in what I would consider a normal year, they would have been sort of banner news. For example, repealing Maryland, My Maryland is the state song, which is something we've all received many emails from you all about for years. That happened. And people don't even realize that we did it because it was crowded out by so many other important high impact issues in the news. Expanding collective bargaining rights to community colleges, something actually Montgomery College already had, but many other community colleges did not, but something I've heard from many of you about. That passed this year after years of effort. I'm thinking of that because former Delegate Miller's on the phone, and she had to defend that bill on the floor for a number of years. Thanks to the groundwork she laid, we were able to get it done. One of the pre-sent-in questions was about the Trust Act and why we didn't sort of trumpet some of the successes of putting that in the Dignity Not Detention bill that Senator Lee talked a little bit about. And it's like people don't even realize some of these things happen because we had such a high volume of high octane bill session. So I did just want to sort of briefly acknowledge that. One of those bills that I think was a big success story and sort of in a normal year would be sort of the only thing people are talking about is the Relief Act. For those of you who have listened to me before, which unfortunately for you all is many of you, I spend a lot of time dealing with the budget as a member of the House Appropriations Committee and a subcommittee chair on that committee. And I spent most of the interim, the period between legislative sessions, preparing for massive budget cuts. I was researching what was done in the Great Recession, trying to figure out, where there was fat, what could be done to address a really difficult budget year. And instead, and I think this is important since this is a Democratic Party organized call, because the federal government stepped up, we had a much stronger economic and budget situation than we expected. And that meant instead of talking about how many teachers to cut, we could talk about overriding the governor's veto of the blueprint for Maryland's future. And instead of conceding the governor's cut on community college operating programs, we could reverse that cut. We had a lot of opportunity that we didn't necessarily expect to have this time a year ago, frankly, when we were all talking to you last. And so that was very positive. Part of that was the Relief Act that we had the resources to pass, which had a number of different aspects to it. One was putting some direct payments into the hands of those who get the earned income tax credit, which is obviously people who are sort of our lowest income earners who need the help the most. Some of it was making sure there was funding targeted for vaccine distribution, testing, PPE purchases. And then a whole nother aspect of it was making sure that there were grants available for small businesses to continue to function during this really difficult time. And so that was a banner piece of bipartisan legislation that we were able to pass early in the legislative session. You know, again, there was so much high octane stuff. I mentioned a moment ago that we overrode the veto of the blueprint for Maryland's future, sometimes known as the Kirwan Commission. Tied to that was something called the Built to Learn Act, which is a huge expansion of school construction in the state of Maryland, which is really important in Montgomery County. Now, we may have forgotten about it over the past year because a lot of our kids have been learning at home. But trust me, as the father of two young kids, kids have to go back to school. They cannot stay home forever. The parents' sanity will not tolerate it. And Montgomery County has had a big problem with school capacity for a long time. And this piece of legislation is going to help us sort of do a little bit of catch up by using some casino revenue and issuing bonds based on that revenue. And Montgomery County is, along with some other big counties, the largest beneficiary of that program to help us get ahead of some of these school construction challenges. Now, an issue that I know many folks care a lot about, and I don't want to step on Delegate Love's toes too much because she's on the Environment and Transportation Committee, is the environment. And I know there was some unfinished work there, but I did want to mention a few very positive pieces of legislation that passed on the environmental front. And I'm a little biased because I was a sponsor of a few of them. One is the EV Bus Transition Act to transition Maryland's approximately 800 municipal buses to zero emissions technology. Right now, a lot of them are diesel burning. And so we passed that legislation. It was part of a broader bill called the Climate Solutions Now Act, which did not pass. And I know many people are let down by it, but some elements of that bill did pass, including that piece of legislation to transition our state bus fleet, with the hope that the next step will be to transition some of our local bus fleets and providing the support that's needed to make sure that happens. We also passed a local bill. Senator Lee mentioned I'm the chair of the Montgomery County House delegation. We passed a Montgomery County only local bill called Community Choice Energy that will allow Montgomery County to set a new default energy provider, electricity provider, for Montgomery County residents that's cleaner and potentially more affordable than the current standard offer service you get through PEPCO. Now, not a lot of people realize this, but PEPCO doesn't actually generate the electricity. PEPCO just delivers the electricity. They buy it from other places. This would make it so that they have a new default of who they buy it for Montgomery County residents. So pretty proud to see that legislation pass, and a big shout out to Delegate Charkoudian from District 20 and Brian Feldman from District 15, who were the real architects of the bill that we all got to push and support and vote for. And a little more wonky, but I think important, we passed a piece of legislation this year to expand the portfolio of what's called the Office of People's Counsel to include an environmental mandate. So the Office of People's Counsel is the residential ratepayer advocate who advocates for residential ratepayers before the Public Service Commission, the body that regulates PEPCO and the other utilities. They've almost solely been focused on, what's the sort of month-to-month rate for a ratepayer. We've expanded their portfolio to make sure they're also taking into account some of our longer-term interests in the environment and making sure that seawater is not seeping down the street around our ankles, and that species aren't being wiped out because of climate change. So think about those environmental issues on behalf of Marylanders. So I was very happy to see that piece of legislation passed that I was the sponsor of, and a big thank you to Senator Feldman on that one as well, because he navigated it through the Senate side. I do just want to briefly touch on some of the transportation issues, since Delegate Kelly teed me up so nicely and there were some questions about it. The biggest one, I think, for our area is the governor's proposal to expand 495 and 270 by 2 new toll lanes in each direction. For a number of years now, the House of Delegates has passed legislation to address this project in various ways. One, to sort of alter how we do public-private partnerships, which is what this is proposed to be, broadly speaking, and sort of changing the underpinnings of that law. Another approach has been to try to put into the statute some of the lofty promises the administration has made. They've made a lot of great promises because of the controversy around the project. We want to make sure those promises actually happen. Unfortunately, they have a record of not following through on some of their guarantees. That legislation's passed the House, bills like that, for 3 years in a row, and unfortunately, through no fault of Senator Lee's, who's been a great champion on this issue and has sometimes been the Senate sponsor of those bills, have just not gotten a hearing in the Senate. And so as of now, the legislature's only power, if we're not going to legislate, is to provide oversight of those projects. The latest is that they expect what's called the pre-development agreement, which is the company, the private company they're hoping is going to explain to them the magic sauce to build 2 new lanes in each direction without any cost to the state and without harming the environment and without taking any homes. They're hoping to send that contract to the Board of Public Works sometime probably in late summer. That process is happening at the same time as the environmental review process. Many of you recall last year a draft environmental impact statement came out. Now they're working to do a final environmental impact statement, which I think they're now expecting either late 2021 or early 2022. So happy to talk more about that project in the Q&A, but I know a lot of people had questions about it, so I thought I'd at least lay the groundwork there now. I do want to turn it over to my colleague, Delegate Love. Ariana explained that we were split between the sort of the typical House floor and what was called the House Annex. As a result, because Sarah was on the House floor, she was a de facto subcommittee chair and had to defend all sorts of pieces of legislation on the House floor, at a clip that you don't usually see someone do until they're in year 10 or so in the legislature. She's in year 3. And so she had a sometimes thankless and often entertaining, for those of us watching her beat back the Republicans, task on the House floor. So with that, Delegate Love.
Thank you, Delegate Corman. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. This is an amazing turnout, so much so that Zoom glitched on us and kept a couple people out. So thank you to all of those of you who got in early and the rest of you who were so patient and were able to just get in. And point of personal privilege, I just want to thank my team and let you know what an incredible group of legislators you have representing you. I mean, it's just, I'm so honored to work with each and every one of them. I mean, Senator Lee with all her work on cybersecurity and human trafficking, Delegate Kelly, I mean, I know Delegate Corman mentioned her email newsletter that was, the Bible, it was the go-to and all the incredible work, but also some of what she touched on, the highlights, the incredible legislation and the passion that she brings to each piece of legislation that she works on, not just that she sponsors, but that she works on. And Delegate Corman, I don't think he ever sleeps. Honestly, he runs our delegation in a way that is just so thoughtful and really lifting people up and communicating with people. He chairs a subcommittee. He's got great bills. He's a guru on all things transportation. Just say Metro, 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 and I swear he appears. I promise. So it was a really interesting session, as my colleagues have said. And for me personally, it was incredibly fulfilling. I've been affiliated with the Maryland General Assembly for 7 years, 4 years as an advocate and 3 years as a legislator. And this year, so many things came together. Not only did I have some good bills passed, Senator Lee mentioned one of them. I was given the opportunity, as my colleague said, to defend bills on the floor, which was terrifying at first. which surprised me. You know, I've done TV, I've done radio, I've litigated, you know, I've done all this stuff. And here I stand up on the House floor and my mouth goes dry and I start stammering. And it's an intense, but really enjoyable experience. Thanks to Delegate Corman, I was also given the opportunity to chair a House delegation committee. So it was really personally fulfilling from that front, but also it was just so many pieces of legislation that we've talked about were pieces of legislation that I worked on years ago at the ACLU, getting the governor out of parole, you know, juvenile restoration, and not only repealing LAOBR, but body cameras and Maryland Public Information Act and all of these things. So it really was an incredible session. And as Delegate Corman said, there were just so many pieces of just incredibly profound bills that passed. Since we're getting close to the end, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. Senator Lee mentioned one of my bills. Another bill that I'm really happy about, it's a little wonky. It has to do with stormwater management regulations, but it's actually really important because it addresses climate change. We all know, because we see it and we live it, we are having more intense rainstorms. They are happening more often. And you don't have to think very far back to know what I'm talking about. I mean, those floods that we had in September of 2020, do you all remember July of 2019 when cars were flooded on Canal Road and people were standing on the top of their cars because the water came up so fast that they couldn't get out of there? Well, one of my bills is to address that, because currently the Maryland Department of Environment is using rainfall data from the 1990s when they are creating stormwater regulations. Well, what does that mean? That means when a building is built or infrastructure is built, they're using rainfall data for their stormwater management from the 1990s, which makes no sense, which means our current infrastructure and buildings and roads and parking lots and all of it can't handle the amount of rainfall and the water that we're getting. So one of my bills requires the Maryland Department of Environment to use current rainfall data. Like I said, very wonky, but actually very important, and will have long-lasting effects. Would love to talk a lot about my plastics and my privacy, but maybe next year they'll pass, and so we can address them then. But I did want to address a lot of the questions that people had around the Climate Solutions Now Act and why that didn't pass. Delegate Corman mentioned that briefly. Climate Solutions Now was a really interesting and omnibus bill dealing with how to address the changing climate. It had a very bold goal of reducing emissions. It dealt with buildings. It dealt with, I have a couple of notes on this. What else did it have? Plan to electrify the fleet, a goal of net zero emissions for new state-funded buildings, planting 5 million trees, including 500,000 in underserved areas. It addressed environmental justice and a number of other things. In the end, when we saw that that bill was not going to move, we passed some of the pieces. As Delegate Corman said, we passed one of his bills having to do with the electrification of the state fleet. We passed the portion that had to do with the 5 million trees. Now, some of you may think, oh, great, trees are pretty, that's nice. Actually, they are the best tool to address climate change. One tree can sequester up to, I think it was 48 pounds of carbon dioxide a day. I mean, something really amazing. So those 5 million trees, it's really important. And what I liked about that is it was attached to a bill that somebody asked us about that wasn't really a great bill until fortunately it got amended in the Senate. And now it came out as a much better bill. So we did pass some of those portions. We also passed a bill strengthening our Environmental Justice Commission. The bigger bill just ran into a difference of approach as to how far we were going to go in our goals, whether we were going to include construction and buildings, and how we were going to pay for it. And my hope is, and the goal is, that those issues will be addressed in the interim, and then we will come back and be able to pass a much more comprehensive bill next year, because there's still a lot of work to be done. So I will end there and want to turn it back over to Linda. And thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight. It's just an honor to represent you.
Thank you, Delegate Love, and thank you to the entire D16 delegation for both your hard work in Annapolis this session. It truly was a memorable session, and also for answering a lot of the questions that were submitted in advance. Before we get to questions, I would like to also acknowledge a couple of people who were shut out because we had some technical difficulties with Zoom. I still don't understand what happened. I want to thank Michael Tardif, our communications chair, for getting those issues fixed. We can take a meeting of more than 100 people. We pay for that and we should be able to do that. I'm not sure what happened, but now we have more than 100 people in the room, so that's great. And I apologize for anyone who was locked out. I would like to acknowledge that Councilmember Andrew Friedson is also here. Welcome, Councilman Friedson. And we also have Joe Gephardt, who is on the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee representing District 16. Welcome, Joe. And also with us tonight is Shruti Bhatnagar, who is also on the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee. She will make a few remarks at the end of this about our precinct organization. She is our precinct co-chair and is working hard to build up our precinct organization for the 2022 election that's coming up. So now I'd like to open this up for questions, a number of questions were submitted in advance, and thank you to the delegation for actually answering a lot of those questions in your remarks. That's very helpful. The delegation did receive all the questions that were submitted in advance, and if your question doesn't get answered, perhaps you can follow up with them or they will follow up with you. There were a couple things, though, that we're going to go to first in the questions that were submitted in advance. If you have questions that you want to ask the delegation now that were not submitted, please put them in the chat. Please make sure that your questions are addressed to everyone and not just to me. The delegation will also be monitoring the chat, and they may take it upon themselves to answer your questions in the chat. And if not, we'll raise them here. So I'd like to start with, there were a number of issues, as I said, that were addressed. One that was not, that sort of caught my eye, that wasn't really on the radar of the General Assembly, but I think it's worth asking about, is there were a couple of questions about the Moses Macedonia African Cemetery that's located on River Road in District 16. And apparently there's a problem with desecration there. I say apparently, I don't live in District 16, but there's a problem with desecration there. And so a number of people have asked whether the delegation members would support the African-American community in ending the desecration of this cemetery. And I'd just like to open it up to you, anyone on the delegation, to respond to that, if they'd like to. Delegate Corman, or would you like to respond to that? Or Delegate Love, your mic is still open. Would you like to respond to that?
Sure, thank you. You know, we've had a lot of exchanges with folks from the church and that area, and I know it is a very complex area, and we certainly appreciate them. They come to a lot of our events, and we appreciate their passion and energy for what they're doing. My understanding is that this is being handled at the county level because it's really more of a county issue than a state issue. But, you know, we've been talking to, I think you all remember that we sent a letter regarding this to the county executive and really urging him to work with you all and to settle this issue.
Yes, and we do have a number of county council members on the call tonight. If they'd like to comment in the chat, that might be useful to people who are concerned about this issue. So thank you for that. Another issue that came up, I know that Delegate Corman talked about the I-270 and the Beltway issues that are out there, but also there was an issue raised about the Purple Line and the public-private partnership regarding the Purple Line. Where are we on that?
Sure. So brief update on the Purple Line. I mean, I think as folks know, there have been some cost disputes between the folks who were building it and the state of Maryland. The construction contractor actually walked off the project. They left. So the state has taken over sort of the day-to-day construction of the things that they can do, like utility relocation and a few other things. There are some things the state is not equipped to do, like the last bit of demolition that's needed with explosives in downtown Bethesda. So while the state is doing that work, they're also in the process of working with the public-private partnership consortium that's overseeing the whole process to find a new construction contractor. They think they now expect that contract to go before the Board of Public Works, I think in the fall. There was actually a Bethesda Beat article today updating the timeline, but the expectation is that, you know, construction will continue and that Purple Line will open and operate, so that there's no sort of threat of it just sort of being left as a half a transit line to nowhere. The legislature has done a couple of things on sort of the oversight end of things, requiring MDOT to come back to us with a few different pieces of information, just sort of make sure this is going right. We also set aside about $2.5 million in funding to support small businesses that are particularly adversely affected. We have some small businesses, frankly, mostly to the east of us, but the Barking Dog, for those of you who know downtown Bethesda, is a good example of one where basically their street or their parking lot or their sidewalk or their front door has basically been taken over by the construction, and it's really impacted their bottom line. So after sort of years of wrestling with the governor over this, frankly, we were able to secure $2.5 million for that program. I just want to say that to me, the Purple Line, which is a project I support, the problems it's having demonstrate why we should all be very concerned about the roadway P3. Because in the case of the roadway P3, they're looking at going to the private sector even earlier in the process, when we know even less about what needs to be done and what some of the complexities are. And that doesn't make sense to me. I want to know more before I hand it over to a private construction company and hope for the best. And the Purple Line story tells us why that's important, because they come back later. The construction companies are not in the business of paying money out of pocket for the good of the state. That's not their job. Their job is to make money. So if they're not making money on the construction, they're going to come back and say, give us more money. And if we don't give them more money, they're going to leave. That's what happened with the Purple Line. And I think we're setting ourselves up for a similar recipe with the roadway P3. And I think that's true whether you support building more roads or not, whether you think roads are going to solve our traffic problems or not. It's the process for which we're going about it that many of us are concerned about, in addition to maybe some of the substantive issues. So I hope that addresses the question. Let me just do another quick shout out, because I see Teresa Warman, who I think is on, representing Delegate Brooke Learman, who's a District 16 native, and I think is running for comptroller, is on with us as well. And perhaps just as importantly, Teresa spent years working for Montgomery County House members in the House of Delegates. So,
welcome. Also submitted in advance, and there are now some questions coming into the chat, which I'll get to here in a second. But I did want, Senator Lee, you talked a lot about the criminal justice reforms and the police reforms that were passed by this session of the legislature. And I think, you know, they were groundbreaking and actually got a lot of national attention. But one question that always comes up on these town halls is the issue of school resource officers, which is really a local issue, but the question was asked, what are the prospects for passing state legislation to disallow the deployment of police in all Maryland public schools? I don't know whether that was discussed in this session, but maybe you could address that.
Yeah, it was discussed, and there was a bill in the House of Delegates dealing with kind of allocating the resources that would go to a resource police officer in schools to actually to support students, and also to taking the police that individual out, the law enforcement officer in schools out of the schools, but it didn't get out of the House of Delegates. So I'm sure it'll be something that will be reintroduced next year again. We feel it's important also that that we also invest in also education programs too, so that we can prevent some of these things. And I think we work with the advocates on this. I think Jews United for Justice worked on this, Carol Stern worked on it. And I'd like to thank all the advocates who devoted a lot of time and energy to this issue, but we'll probably be back again next year working on that. But just didn't get out of the House this year.
Yeah, it's if I may jump in for a second.
Sure.
Linda, this is a really hot topic in the House. We have varied and strong reactions on this, even among the Democrats. There are a lot of people who really want and support police in their schools. There are a lot of us who don't. So that bill has been around for a while, and it will continue to be around, but it's a really tough one. And there's not even, as I said, a clear consensus among Democrats.
Yeah, like I said, it comes up a lot, and it is a tough one.
Yeah, but we do welcome your input because that's so important. I think the problem this year is because of COVID-19, and none of the advocates, the proponents and opponents, were able to go and meet with us and meet with our colleagues to have a substantive dialogue on this issue. But I think next year, if things get back to normal, we probably will be able to do so, and the issue will be back, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you. And Delegate, Senator Lee, I know you've been active on this issue. There was a question in the chat about dealing with the recent spate of Asian American hate. And as you know, we have had a lot of, we've had several crime sprees in Maryland directed at Asian American business folks. And so the question was, what is being done to address that? Do you know of any efforts that are underway? Maybe you could start that conversation.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank you for this question, because yes, the Asian American Pacific Islander community have been the subject of these racially motivated bias and hate crimes attacks, and they've been very violent, and they've been underreported because the community is there are people in the community that are afraid to report it because of retaliation. But there's been a surge in anti-Asian hate crimes and violence across the country. It's risen by 150%. And Maryland is not immune from it. We just the other day heard about two elderly Korean American women in Baltimore City being attacked and having a cinder block hurled at their heads, and they sustained very serious injuries. Even in downtown Bethesda, there was an attack against a woman of Asian descent. The perpetrators threatened her, but thank goodness for the bystanders that were standing by. They came and they helped de-escalate the event, and they probably saved her life or saved her from injury. And I don't know who those bystanders are, but I'd like to thank them. And also, I had a friend and a colleague in Rockville, Maryland. Her home was violently attacked 3 times in 2020 around October. And that was very disturbing. And there were 2 incidences that were reported in Chevy Chase, Maryland, but they decided not to go forward and formally report it because they're afraid of retaliation. So this is something real that our community is facing. And I have actually spoken on the Senate floor twice on this, and I asked my colleagues to join us in denouncing these attacks and standing strong with us, and they did. Our Senate president came and got on the floor and denounced these acts and said we need to stick together and work together. So did our House Speaker, Adrian Jones, and my colleagues here, all my District 16 colleagues. It's important to stand strong with us because when you attack Asian American Pacific Islanders, you're attacking us all as Americans and everything that we value and stand for. Because a lot of us, some of us have been here for 3 generations, like my own family. We've made substantial contributions, and we built America through the railroads IT digital revolution. You know, Zoom was created by an Asian American, Chinese American, and we served in the U.S. Armed Forces, like my father, who was a U.S. World War II Navy veteran who defended freedom on the Atlantic and the Pacific. He was part of the greatest generation. And so we've given our part, but we're seen as foreigners. So this is very disturbing for us. I have asked Chief Marcus Jones of our Montgomery County Police Department to resurrect the Asian American Advisory Committee for the Montgomery County Police Department, and he said yes. And he's been working very closely with our community, whether it be forums or Zoom meetings, to help us be able to combat this this violence against our community. He's been terrific. So has Rockville City Police Chief Victor Brito, and also State's Attorney John McCarthy, and our other colleagues. So also I would ask everyone, you know, even if you're not Asian American, if you see something like that, if you could report it too, and you could also stand strong with us. And we also have different campaigns going on, information campaigns going on right now to alert our community about how they can stay safe, but also we're working with also the Black, Latino, and Jewish and faith and NAACP in partnership to stand up to bias and hate. So I don't want to go on and on. We also have a national campaign called the Yellow Whistle Project, which is this whistle here. So if you see anything going on, blow on this whistle. We're getting 20,000 of these from a Columbia University professor named Agnes, Dr. Agnes Shu Tang, who's launched, who's donated hundreds of thousands of these whistles, and she's going to give 20,000 to Maryland. So anyway, thank you again for this, and thank you for caring, and thank you for those who have stand up with our community.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Another question in the chat, I'm going to direct this one to Delegate Kelly, and if you would like to involve your other colleagues. This comes from Joe Schifrin, and talks about HB 18 being a great step forward in addressing the imbalance of in the rent court system.
Oh.
But other rent bills were not passed. And so they want to know, what is the plan to assist the 200,000 households facing eviction in Maryland, especially since HB 1312 and SB 910 were not passed?
Awesome. Thanks for the question. I don't do housing. I'm going to look at Sarah because I'm guessing that's in environment and transportation, but I will answer the other JUFJ question in there, which is on the Time to Care Act, because that's come up a couple times as well. And Sarah or Mark can nod as to who wants the housing one, but I'm going to guess it's Sarah. So on the Time to Care Act, so frustrating that it was not a priority for us this year. It makes no sense. Obviously, the Time to Care Act would have established the paid family and medical leave system, basically a short-term disability system that obviously we know now more than ever is essential, critically needed in the state of Maryland. Many other states already have this. I'm sitting here in California right now. They've had it for coming up on 30 years. I hung out with my friend who had a baby. We were hanging out outside last week, and she said, my husband's getting paternity leave. It's just disability though. It's only 75% pay for 12 weeks. It's like a dream, right? In Maryland, we don't have that. We don't have that when we're caring for an ill loved one. It's heartbreaking and infuriating. I can say that this year was going to be a tough year, even though it was the right year to do it, to make the statement, because of the way the paid family and medical leave system is financed. Everything was really unstable and people were really afraid to do anything in terms of taxes. That being said, next year would be a great year to do it. And so I really hope that we do it. The only caveat is we don't need to do it next year if we can pass the federal bill, which does have a shot for the first time in my recent memory. It has a legitimate shot, not 100%, it's not a shoo-in, but almost 50%. So during the interim, we can work on the Federal Family Act, and then we don't need to move it at the state level because we have been trying I mean, I worked on this bill for at least a decade. I passed it on to my colleague Delegate Valderrama, who's had it for 2 years now. So it is something that Maryland has been very hesitant to do. So it may be one of those things that unfortunately, I mean, when do we count on the feds to do something, right? But if we can get the feds to do it, Biden supports it. We have both houses of Congress. It's a real possibility. I would love it if we can pass the federal bill, but if not, we need to come back very strongly next session to make sure that this happens, because we know now what a critical component for family economic security it is to have some time off of work when caring for a sick loved one, when sick yourself with a new child, etc. So that is my answer to that GFJ question. And Sarah, do you want to take the housing question?
Well, I want to tell you all about some bills that did pass dealing with tenants and landlords. There was a bill in the Senate and House that establishes access to legal representation for tenants, and also requires a 10-day notice provision when their landlord intends to pursue legal action against them for failure to pay rent, and that passed. And this is a first in the nation effort, and we were able to get that out. We also passed a bill that dealt with commercial tenants, especially now. Our small businesses are really hard hit. And I'd like to thank Bonnie Fogel for helping us and for her advocacy on this too. We passed a bill that will ensure that those who are subject to personal liability clauses and will have enough time at the end of the pandemic state of emergency to make the proper financial arrangements to satisfy their debts. I didn't think it went further enough, but it was a compromise, and that apparently we were able to pass that law. So Sarah, did you want to add anything else?
Actually, Senator Lee, you said what I was going to, so nope, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to have to wrap it up here because I do want the delegation to make some closing remarks, but I did want to ask, point out that there were some questions about redistricting, and it was answered in the chat by the delegation, some members of the delegation, that the redistricting commission is just getting started on their work. And then there was also a question, I guess that maybe this could go to Delegate Corman, about whether the General Assembly is going to be, the sessions are going to be available online, streamed as they were this time in the future.
So I don't think we have a full answer to that yet. I mean, I'll say the House floor was shifting towards streaming all of our floor sessions prior to the pandemic. So if you think back to the beginning of 2020, they started putting some of the floor sessions on as they were testing the system. That sort of pilot program became our full-time life when the pandemic hit, and the Senate quickly followed suit as well once we had to sort of close the building doors because of to stop transmission in 2020, and obviously we kept that up in 2021. Our committee hearings have always been, not always, but for the last 10 or 12 years have been live streamed. This was the first year that all our subcommittee meetings were live streamed and our voting sessions. My hope is that all that will remain. When I became county delegation chair, one of the first things I did was began streaming our county delegation meetings, because I think it's an important way for people to see what's going on if they're interested. And most people do not want to or can't take the time to get to Annapolis and sort of watch with their own eyes some things. So it's a great way for people to be able to engage without having to take a day off of work or find someone to watch their kids or whatever it is. So I think there's a lot of hope that these things will continue, but also we just got out of the session. So I think there's still an evolving understanding of what worked and what didn't. For example, I know many people on this call would not consider the sign-up system one that worked. I heard a lot of complaints about the sign-up system, even though it might have been slightly better than having to drive to Annapolis to punch your name into a board before noon. There were a lot of complaints about the sign-up system. So I think there's going to be some lesson learned and some adjustments made, but hopefully the transparency and access will continue without maybe some of the hassles that went with it, like Senator Lee was saying, not being able to sit sort of knee to knee with folks in our offices and exchange information that way.
Thank you. Okay, I just wanted to mention, for those of you, again, I want to apologize for those of you who were shut out of this. We still don't understand exactly what happened there. It was a Zoom thing, but we're glad that you were able to join us. And just so you know, if anybody was unable to hear the first part of this, or or you know of people that were unable to join us because they were not able to get in at the beginning, this recording will be distributed to everyone. This is being recorded, and it will be distributed to everyone who registered for this meeting. So now I'd just like to ask the delegates to please just, give us a quick wrap up. And I think we'll go in reverse order this time. So I'll start with Delegate Love. Do you want to just say a few words to kind of sum up?
Wow, wasn't planning on closing arguments, but I think I said everything in my opening. Thank you again, everyone, and Linda and Michael for all of your support of what we do. There are a lot of things that we didn't have a chance to get to. I noticed some complaints in there that we didn't talk about jobs and the economy, and there's a lot more to talk about, but we're all accessible, and we're here and happy to talk with you. So thank you everyone for coming and joining us tonight.
Delegate Corman?
Yeah, ditto. I mean, I'll try to go through and respond to the folks who submitted questions ahead of time that we didn't have time to get to or get into with much detail. Obviously, there's a lot of issues we deal with in 90 days, and then really the other 9 months of the year. We are really full-time in a lot of ways. So I think we all dropped some version of our contact information in there. You can find us pretty easily on Google these days for further questions or ideas, or if you need any assistance with state agency. My aide was off today, so I had all the emails forwarded to me. And here we are 14 months or so into this, and we're still getting new unemployment claim issues from our constituents literally every day. So if you need help with anything like that, MVA, unemployment, PEPCO, whatever it is, contact any of us. We all work pretty closely together, our offices. So we are here to help.
Thank you. Delegate Kelly?
Thank you. I will just respond very quickly to one of the comments that was in the chat mentioning that we hadn't talked a lot about jobs and job creation. I do want to make sure everyone knows we did a ton of work on that space this year. All of us did. I myself, I think I had 4 bills related to job creation. It was a real priority for me. Workforce issues, one bill related to childcare and making sure that childcare centers can hire lead teachers who are switching careers. We know that's good for childcare because people who are switching careers into childcare, they're older, they know what they want, they stay longer, less turnover. So it's great for the employer. It's also great for the worker because what this did was really reduce regulations that were unnecessary and create on-the-job training, which was great. We licensed audiology assistants. That was also my bill. That's going to create 900 jobs. A massage therapy licensure bill that will help massage therapists actually pass the exam instead of just going into debt for massage school and not passing the exam. And 4 interstate licensure compacts that's going to help our healthcare professionals practice in different states. So workforce is an issue that a lot of us were spending a lot of time working on, and obviously really essential at this time. So just wanted to touch on that. And again, thank everyone for joining us. We represent the best district in Maryland. We're so lucky, and want to echo what my colleague said. I love working with this team, and thank you to all my teammates for being so great.
Thank you. Senator Lee, and please, people stay on for just 2 more minutes after Senator Lee finishes because we have an important message. Senator Lee.
Yeah, we're here for you, and we have your back, front, and sight, especially during this pandemic. My chief of staff, Michael Laurie, is on this Zoom here, and he has posted my end of session letter on a link, so you can get that. But please feel free to contact me or Michael anytime. We're here to serve you. While it was a very challenging session with the ongoing pandemic and the economic downturn, which was awful, and the urgency to address all these inequities and injustice in the criminal justice system, we all worked as a team to ensure that we did pass a balanced budget and legislation to get us through this pandemic, as we indicated to you, as well as protect our investments that are important to us, like education, healthcare, public safety, and other longstanding priorities, which we hold very dear. So we thank everyone from the bottom of our heart for participating in this town hall, because it's really a good time that we can interact with you and hear what your priorities are and those of your families. I'm very hopeful for the future as more people are getting vaccinated and kids are getting back to school. And something that really makes me hopeful and happy is we have a new president, Joe Biden, and a vice president, Kamala Harris, the first woman, the first Black and Asian American vice president, whose strong leadership have helped move us forward as a country, and also fought for that great stimulus money that has helped our state that Delegate Corman was talking about. Again, on behalf of all my colleagues, thank you for the privilege and honor of allowing us to serve you in the Maryland General Assembly. And thank you, Linda Foley.
Thank you, Senator Lee, and thank you, the delegates from the District 16 delegation. This was a terrific town hall. So you can see how important it is to elect competent people to our legislature, which all of these are, all of these folks are. And so now we need to do that again in 2022. So I would like to introduce Shruti Bhatnagar, who is the chair of our precinct organization and a member of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, for a brief message about some of the work we're doing to get ready for the 2022 election. Shruti.
Thank you, Linda. My name is Shruti Bhatnagar, and Linda has just introduced me, so I'm going to jump straight into my message and say, I'm here to invite you to join our volunteer team. As Linda just mentioned, that the Democratic 2022 elections are coming up, and they're going to be really important for Maryland and Montgomery County. The Democratic Party is getting ready for a listening tour and door knocking when it is safe. We are getting ready to make calls and make contact with our voters. So we need to make sure that we have a robust team of volunteers, which includes having precinct leaders in every precinct, which means having a chair and a vice chair and a robust team of volunteers to help us achieve those goals. There are 34 precincts in District 16, some of which have vacancies. In 2020, the Montgomery County Democratic Party recruited and mobilized over 400 volunteers for the poll watching program, and we need to keep up with that energy to make sure we are well prepared for 2022. So I see there are some precinct leaders on this call from the amazing District 16 team, but for those of you who are not precinct leaders, I want to mention that the precinct leaders are neighborhood volunteers. They are appointed by the Democratic Party to be the conduit between the party and the voters. They represent a single designated polling location for their area, and they have a very important role in helping organize activities for the Democratic Party. So please consider volunteering, invite a friend to join with you, and recommend someone you know to help build a robust team of volunteers. It's a great way to connect with your community. You don't need any prior experience. Training and materials will be provided to volunteers. So whether you choose to be a volunteer as a precinct leader or a team member in your district, your participation is most welcome. We have volunteer orientation sessions to onboard precinct leaders. Once a month, I'm happy to schedule a time to talk to you and also connect you to your district reps. Please email at precinct@mcdcc.org to learn more about precinct volunteer information, and check our calendar on the website at mcdcc.org. Our next session is scheduled for May 25th at 7 p.m. I hope that you will consider joining and participating in that to get more information. Thank you so much, and I'm dropping the links in the chat.
Thank you, Shruti. Appreciate that very much, and appreciate all your hard work on this, and everybody else who is working, all those volunteers who are working to make the Democratic Party as strong as it is, and electing these great leaders who have gone to Annapolis and had this very productive session for us. So I want to thank everybody on behalf of the Democratic Party for showing up tonight and for participating. This has been a very lively discussion. Again, the recording will be made available to everyone. I want to thank Michael Tardif, who's our communications chair, who works behind the scenes, and also you see him in the chat quite a bit as he makes this all come together for us. Thank you again for joining us. Everybody, please continue to stay safe. Everybody, please get vaccinated, and we will see you. Have a good rest of your evening. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Been well.
For all your